And we're rolling. Overview of the Bible, John.
Once again, we're picking up here in John chapter 8. We just looked at the adulterous woman caught in adultery, that the Lord said, "You're not condemned, but go and sin no more." And then he goes on and he talks in the rest of this. He's already said he's the bread of the bread from heaven. Now he's saying, "I am the light of the world." And it's one of these "I am" statements again. I am the light of the world. And he goes on and explains that throughout most of the chapter here. And then he gets to verse 31. Very important verses, pretty well-known verses here, 31 and 32. Jesus therefore was saying to those Jews who had believed him, "If you abide in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And I think that's really important. A lot of people quote that last part, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." But the first part is, "If you abide in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine." If you live in his word, you know what? You'll understand who he is. You're truly his follower. And when you live in that, his words, then you know the truth. You know it in an experiential way, and the truth will set you free. It's like if I was talking to a guy who was a postman, and he delivered door to door, and he started telling me how he really hates dogs, and one day I decide to go on his route, and I take his route, and I go and I'm putting mail in the mailboxes, and there's these dogs chained up, on the porch, and they're like going after my legs and trying to bite me and whatever. And so I walk in his shoes. I live his life, and then I know the truth of why he hates dogs. Well, it's like that in this. If we live in his word, if we abide in what he says, then we know experientially why he says what he says and the truth of what he says, and says we'll know the truth, and the truth will set us free. Well, it goes on here, and he's having this big contention. I mean, he's really making himself known at this point. It's getting real intense. And in verse 48 of chapter 8, the Jews answered and said to him, "Do we not say rightly that you are a Samaritan and have a demon?" They're going to get, they're going to really get him. So they say, "You're a Samaritan." That's like the worst thing you could say. We had a little girl that my wife babysat for when I was in graduate school, and she got really mad at her brother, and the worst thing she could think to say to him is, "You but." So anyway, this is what it's like. The worst thing they could say here is, "You Samaritan," and it's like, "You're a half-breed and you have a demon." And Jesus answered, "I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor him." And they go on in verse 52. The Jews said to him, "Now we know that you have a demon. Abraham died because he said, 'Truly I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never see death.' He says, 'Now we know that you have a demon because Abraham died and the prophets died also. And you say, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never taste of death.'" Verse 53, "Surely you are not greater than our father Abraham, who died. The prophets died too. Whom do you make yourself out to be?" And he's kind of been saying that. But Jesus answered, "If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. And you have not come to know him, but I know him. And if I say that I do not know him, I shall be a liar like you." Wow. I should be a liar like you. You liar. People don't like being called liars. There's some recent political things in our thing where people are calling each other liars at this point. But I do not know him, but I do know him and keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad. What a statement here. Well, they didn't let that go. The Jews therefore said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham?" Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am." Before Abraham was born, I am. He just says, "I am." Here's that "I am" statement, and this is the clearest declaration of it here we got in this whole book. Is he just says, "I am." And what's he talking about? He's talking about his eternal existence here, his existence as God, and he's declaring not only that, he's declaring the name of God given to Moses in the Old Testament, "I am." And they understood. Verse 59, it says, "Therefore they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple." So here he's really making declaration of who he is, and it's very clear, and they understand it. I think it should be so clear we should understand it. And so we move from there into just one of my favorite stories in the whole Bible. It's in chapter 9. It's the healing of the man born blind, and it starts out in verse 2. It says, his disciples, Jesus' disciples, he asked him, they asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? And, that would be a logical question. All through the Old Testament, we're saying, if they live in righteousness, all these good things happen. If you break the law, all these bad things happen, and there was many a times we see that sickness or affliction was a result of sin. But Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was in order that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day, night is coming when no man can work. And so he was just saying here, this man was born this way for the glory of God. Well, what was the glory of God? Well, we're going to see what that was as we go through this chapter, but it's just really priceless what happens here. So Jesus goes, he tells him to wash, he spits, he gets some, spits on the ground, gets some clay out of that, puts it on his eyes, tells him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. He goes and comes back and he can see. And, he's pretty excited. And people, and the officials, the Pharisees and whatever, are asking, how can you see? And he said, well, this man told me to go to the pool of Siloam and wash, and I did, and I received my sight. And they said, where is he? And he said, I don't know. And so it goes on, and so the Pharisees come to his parents. He said, this young man, he says, is this your son, and was he born blind, and how can he see? And they say, well, he's our son, we know that. He was born blind, we know that. But how he can see, we don't know. You go ask him. He's of age. And it says they did that. His parents, verse 22, his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess him to be the Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. So they're kind of putting it off, saying, we know he's our son. Pretty good. We know he was born blind, but how he can see, we don't know. Go ask him. And so the Pharisees come to this guy the second time. They asked him the first time. He told them what happened. Come to a second time and says, give glory to God, verse 24. We know that this man is a sinner. They're talking about Jesus. We know this man is a sinner. And the guy that was restored from blindness says, he therefore answered, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. They said therefore to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he said, I love this. He answered them and said, I told you already. You did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You do not want to become his disciples too, do you? And I think, oh, that's great. Hear this guy. And so they just revile him, says, we're disciples of Moses. We don't know this guy. He's a sinner. We don't know where he's come from. And then verse 31, the guy says, we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he hears him. Since the beginning of time, it has never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of the blind person. In the verse before that, he actually said, well, here's an amazing thing, that you do not know where he is from, and yet he opened my eyes. So here this guy is just schooling these Pharisees on this whole thing. And finally, this man says, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Verse 34, they answered and said to him, you were born entirely in sins, and are you teaching us? And they put him out. See, the disciples made the statement at the beginning saying, whose sin is it that he was born blind, his or his parents? And they made that assumption. And here at the end of this story, the Pharisees were operating under that same thing. You were born in your sins. You were born entirely in sins, and you're trying to teach us? Who are you to teach us? We are the Pharisees. We have the knowledge. And it's just hilarious here that, he says, hey, do you want to hear the story again? Because you want to be his disciples? And they're like, you can just tell they're getting riled. And so Jesus finds the guy. Verse 35, Jesus heard that they had put him out, and finding him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he answered and said, and who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking to you now. That's an interesting way to introduce yourself. He is the one who is talking with you. And he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. And it's really interesting here that we see that here we have a very specific declaration. And Jesus had earlier, in the other Gospels said, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. You should only worship the Lord your God. And here, what Jesus does is when this guy who's been healed, he's healed from his blindness, he was blind from birth. What an amazing thing. He'd never seen anything, and his eyes are open. The guy says, I believe in you, and he says he worshiped him. And the reason that in this book of John we see that Jesus is being declared as God in the flesh, Jesus doesn't tell him, you can't worship me, I'm not God. He doesn't resist him at all. And so we see that Jesus received worship. And so once again, all through this book, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am in the last chapter. And we see Jesus making that declaration. And John records it. The next chapter will be, I am the door. I am the great shepherd. I am that I am.